Thanks again for being here, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2021. Give yourselves a hand. We made it. Yes. 2021 is here. I am so excited. We had some family over on New Year's Day, so we were excited to cheer in 2021 with them. And I was telling them, I said, I've never been so glad to see a year end. But I also was excited to be able to say thank you to 2020 for a lot of the things that it taught me and the things that, that I had to get a hold of because of what 2020 did. We had to learn a lot of generosity and compassion. And that's the whole reason really that we kind of started this whole empathy thing, because of really what 2020 was doing to us. So 2020 can get the heck out of here, but we are thankful for it. We're glad that 2021 is here and we're ready to go with it. So if you, just a quick reminder, if you are not getting reminders or emails and you'd like to do that, you can go to provokedayton.com and we'll put you on the list, or you can put it in the chat, whichever is easiest for you. And we'll make sure that you get on the list so that you get all the reminders and emails. Like I said, we have been discussing empathy, and 2020 launched us into that subject, and we thought it was a great, especially when we hit Zoom and everything, we thought empathy was a great tool for us to use as leaders. I think if we can capture the art of empathy, then we can capture a lot of leadership for ourselves, but also how we lead others. And the last time we talked, Scott led us in a discussion about the balance of truth and grace. And he's going to go into more of that in just a little bit. But we believe that creating empathy is the balance of this truth and grace and how we understand truth and grace in our lives. So some of us tend to lean towards truth and giving all truth and no grace. And some of us lean towards all grace and no truth. And so when we lean towards all grace, we get into an enabling posture, right? We don't give anybody truth. We're just giving them all grace because we're making them feel better, but it might be enabling people. When we go towards all truth, then we're just trying to fix people and we're not collaborating with people. And so as we learned last week, the balance of that is what creates empathy for us. And again, like I said, if we can master that tool of empathy and get that balance in our life, it helps us as leaders with our family, with our friends, and at work all around. So as we are talking in this hour, I'd like you to think about what you are. Do you lean towards truth? Do you lean towards growth? Or I'm sorry, grace or truth? What do you lean towards? What is your default that you go to? That would be the question. It was really interesting when we were discussing what we wanted to talk about in this session. Anne said something really interesting. She said, when you don't have this balance of truth and grace and empathy in your life, your default voice becomes too loud. Right. So you not only do you just go to your default voice, which we all do in situations, we're going to go to our default, but that default voice becomes too loud. We become too unhealthy. And so that's why we think this balance of truth and grace is a really important tool for you as a leader. Now, like I said, we've been talking about empathy and action. And so I know that you had a chance to put empathy in action over the holidays. If there was any year for us to put empathy in action, right, it was this year. So can anybody kind of speak up and tell me, how did you put empathy into action with your family, with your friends over the holidays? Was it during work? Was it off work? Who can tell me how you put empathy in action? You can go ahead and just unmute yourself and start talking. Anybody?
I'll say something.
Okay, Amy.
We had a friend who was going to be spending Christmas alone, and we invited him, even though it wasn't, I don't know, it could have changed the family dynamic. We invited him, and that was just, it felt good to all of us.
That is a great way to put empathy in action. That's the one thing that you think about. I'm glad you said that because it changed your family dynamic, right?
Mhm.
So it could have, everybody has a different way of seeing their family, especially at the holidays. And so to invite somebody else that's not normally there is a big deal. So way to go on that.
Yeah.
Good job. Anybody else? How'd you put empathy in action?
Kathy, I delivered a lot of stuff to people with COVID. So
Awesome. That is
made sure to
great.
call. So yeah.
That's amazing. And that's such a great thing. That's the one thing I think during this year we've really kind of tried to figure out how to be more generous with people. That I think that was one of my lessons of 2020, that to become more generous was a big deal. So way to go. Anybody else? How'd you put empathy in action?
Hey, Kathy.
Yeah.
I applied it a little bit, and I thought through it in how I applied myself with my clients with work. So I work in an industry where the end of year is extremely stressful. You add COVID and everything's rapid fire, and it's really quick to get really stressed. And I tried to just stop and remember to put myself, remember where they were coming from and try to speak to them and not react to them, but to actually assist them in understanding really how they were feeling and be more empathetic to their position. So this kind of helped guide me to how to best support them.
That's great. That is really good to be able to, thank you for that, Jill, because that's a really good way, again, not to use our default voice, right? So not to go into that, but to express empathy for someone else and try and put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand their point of view. So way to go with that. Good job. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Scott so that he can talk a little bit more about the grace and truth for us. There you go, Scott.
Well, good morning, everybody. Fortunately, I'm on my third cup of coffee at 7:09 a.m. I've got a towel under my door, so I don't wake up my family. But hey, thanks for joining us. And what we're going to talk about is this invitation challenge, this matrix, and it's a hard place to get to. And the big question is like, how do we get to this space where we empower people? My father told me a long time ago, and I think it was Carnegie or somebody said that, you have to give somebody a reputation to live up to. How do you do that for people? Maybe in a place in our lives where words aren't hurtful, they're not harmful, they're not selfish, and they're not self-centered. And a word that I adore in my own life is, where can I be useful for people? And a place where we can accept whether, when we're talking to someone, whether they hear us or not, and whether or not they don't react the way we want them to, doesn't mean they didn't hear us. And maybe a place where we can leave a conversation and both people leave without resentment, and both people maybe hold acceptance. Because, Kathy talked about this too, is, truth without grace is just mean. And grace without truth is meaningless. And it's a hard place to get to. And so one of the things that's complicated is our language has to change. Now, I'll be 56 years old in about 12 days, maybe 12 days, 13 days. And so I can't take this mindset that, how I grew up and the language that I use is going to carry me off in the future. And I have to be willing to accept that my language and my attitude and the way I carry myself in the conversations has to be different. Because as Kathy said, we will use our default language. And there's a lot of times in my own life where my default language doesn't work very well. So if we go to the next slide. So how do we get to this new place for grace and truth? So our language must change if we want a different outcome. So if we just keep carrying the same conversation into people's lives over and over and expect a different result, then unfortunately that's just delusion. And it doesn't work. And one of the things that when we were talking about having this conversation that Anne brought up was, and I actually had this on my desk, and it's helped me greatly. So I want to thank Ann Thompson for helping me understand this differently, if I have a tough conversation, who do I want to be in that conversation? And actually, if I had, and I actually have to prepare and spend time preparing for that conversation instead of I'm slightly an extrovert, shocker. And I like to do a lot of different things. So I like to move really at high speed. And sometimes I just like to wing it. And unfortunately, some of these conversations, we just can't wing it. We have to prepare for them. So who do I want to be? So we have to prepare for a new meaning. And grace should be kind and thoughtful and loving. And as Kathy said, fixing and avoiding and enabling is not grace. And the truth should be indisputable facts without my feelings or my interpretations of an event. And the big thing is to use the triangle. I saw these two quotes and I love them. It says, remember to load your brain before you shoot off your mouth. I like it. And number two is open your mind before you open your mouth. And so if we go to the triangle, and I love the shapes because they really help me. And I think when I think about the shape, when my heart and my mind and my mouth are all connected by an extension cord, I can be really useful to people and really useful to myself and really useful to a loving, caring God. Now, unfortunately, sometimes that gets unplugged. Both units get unplugged, all three get unplugged, and chaos begins. And that's just going to happen because I'm human and I can make mistakes. But when I think about up, and I think for me is I can't begin to fathom God's love for me. And I think sometimes, at least when I was maybe newer in this journey, I wanted all the answers. And I think if I want the answers, I'm trying to be like God versus with God, because I'm not going to get all the answers. I'm not. And then for those of us that have children and we have grandchildren, which in my opinion, we should have had grandchildren first on this planet because this would be a really lovely place to live. But if you think about your own children or even grandchildren, it's like this. They look up to you in amazing ways and they listen to you and they watch your words. They watch your facial expression. They say these two words relentlessly. Watch this. So they call me Papa. So watch this, Papa. And it's such a beautiful thing. And I think sometimes their acceptance and love is what they're reaching up for. And they're reaching up into us for that. And then so to think about this triangle differently is think about a time when either you were with your children or someone that you really cared about or grandchildren, and they were free. So free of resentment, free of fear, free of all those things. And all you wanted to do was hold on to that moment. You just wanted to hold on to that as tight as you could. And I was telling the group before we started, our grandchildren came down for a week. They left on Sunday. And part of me was excited for them to leave because, the house is a mess and we got to clean all this stuff up. But when they left, I cried and because I missed them. I missed that joy and I missed that laughter. And I wanted to hold on to that moment. But I think here's the beautiful thing about a caring and loving God is God loves us that much, even when we're at our worst, in our worst moments, in our worst mistakes, inside of our worst words. He loves us that much, even to the edge of denial. And I think, when I think of the love that God has for me, I think he loves me from jungle bars to bar rooms to prison bars. I mean, he just loves me. And it's unconditional and it's absolute. And I don't have to understand that. I just have to accept it. And then so a couple of maybe three events before we talked about the triangle, and then we talked about Jesus at the temple when he was teaching. Next slide. And then, so when we were talking about this, so Jesus at the Mount of Olives, and he went there a lot, and there was two probably really pivotal moments. And one is he was there the night before he was betrayed, and he was also there when he ascended. But I think when I think about when he went to the Mount of Olives, that's where he went up into his Father, and that came down into him, and then that went out into the world. And so when I think about my own relationship with God, is where do I spend time up, whether it be in prayer, whether it be in solitude, or the 5 S's. So where do I get that, and where does that come up into me, and where does that come down into me, and how does that go out into the world? Because when I'm connected and I understand all 3 of those, beautiful things happen. And here's the amazing thing about that event, when he was at the Mount of Olives, and then he comes down and he's teaching in the temple, and then he's interrupted. He doesn't say, hey, like, wait for the bell to ring, right? Or I'm teaching right now, get with you in a minute. He's available in the moment all the time. And sometimes when we're connected, we have to be available, even when it's not convenient for us. We have to be available for people. And so up in his teaching, he's teaching at the temples when the Pharisees bring this woman accusing her of adultery. He's living his purpose. He's teaching. This is who we believe. We are up with him, not what society or what we have told ourselves what we're supposed to be all about. Now, in that, his purpose does not include that he's simply teaching. He's living. But what he could teach at any given moment, his identity is in his Father up in him, not our identity, but his identity in us. And I think for me personally, my own perception of what I believe about myself was really messed up for decades. And I've given myself a break. You know, I like to say that I use my past not to torture myself, but to be useful to other people. And I understand that in my identity today. And there's many things that I've done that I'm not proud of, but I'm not afraid to speak to them if it can be useful to people. Now, when that goes out into the world, I think what I love about this story is he just stops. He stops teaching, right? He gets quiet. And then part of us, when we go out into the world, and we can get really quiet in our minds and our souls, even in the midst of rage and chaos and all the things around us, we can get quiet in our own little world. When he gets quiet and this woman is drugged into this crowd of people, he gets quiet. He puts her in between him and the crowd. He ignores all the words that's coming and being shouted as people begin to condemn her. And really what they're trying to do is they're trying to trick him. And what he does is he kneels to the ground and he starts writing in the dirt. And I think what's really interesting about that is he forces people to go inside of themselves and deflects maybe potentially the energy against the woman, and maybe that energy is turned inward. And then he speaks truth with grace. The ones without sin should cast the first stone. So it's not a crowd moment. It's an individual moment. And he doesn't judge them or her. His identity is up in him, and then it goes out into the world. And I just love that story. It's a beautiful picture of how even inside of chaos is how we can use grace and truth at the same time. And then I'll end with this. So Ann used this word. I'm giving Ann Thompson a bunch of kudos too, because the last time we had a session before Provoke, I learned a bunch, and I'm really grateful for her and our relationship, because I learn something every time I speak with her. But she used a word, and it is to be choiceful. And so we have a choice every time we enter a conversation. And then how can grace and truth be equal partners? How do we do that? And to be choiceful means that our choices will define us. And I think our life is made up of a series of choices. I used to tell my kids, hey, just try to make a good choice sandwich. Just put 2 choices together, because you're going to make a bad one. But just try to put 2 together. And I think good choices actually turn into really good habits. And then habits turn into really good results. And then really good results turn into competence. And competence turns into confidence. And I think when we have humble competence and humble confidence, that's where our purpose really begins. And I believe I have this crazy thing upstairs, and every time I go up into my brain, I need to have adult supervision, so I shouldn't be up there alone. But here's what I believe about what we think is what we believe. And what we believe is what we give to the world. And what we give to the world is what the world sees in us. And when I think about that, I think about the triangle. Where am I up? How is that coming down into me? And how is that going out into the world? And when all of that is beautifully connected, and it's not going to happen all the time, but when it does, we're living his purpose, and we're listening, and we're quiet, and we're impactful, and we're making a huge difference. So, hey, thank you for getting up this morning and spending time with us. And I really enjoy the shapes. They help me. I have a toolbox that doesn't include just a hammer and a nail today. I've got a semicircle and a square and a triangle and invitation matrix. So bless y'all. Ann?
Thank you, Scott. And Happy New Year, everybody. It's so great to see all your beautiful faces for those that are on and continuing to dig into this whole concept of empathy with us. We're taking a lot of time with this one because it's a big one in emotional intelligence, and it has lots of kind of tails to it. And so we want to give you lots of different ways to think about it and apply it in your life. And so I want to tag back into something that Scott said earlier, which was that if we're going to enter into new conversations where we're bringing together truth and grace in a way that are balanced, that we have to understand who we want to be in those conversations. How do we want to show up? And so that really ties back into this whole identity question. So we want to go to identity just for a second here to ground us, because what I think is true about any real behavior change is identity change. At the end of the day, any true behavior change that sticks is a shift in how we see ourselves. And so we want to kind of level set identity, because identity plays such an important role in this grace and truth piece. It depends on how we see ourselves in any given interaction that determines then how we show up in it. So let me just level set around what we mean by identity. Okay, so identity, at least in this context, we're going to talk about it as it's the description of how we hold who we are. So in any given situation, we have this in the back of my mind, right? It defines our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves. It's the positive way that we hope to be viewed by others, right? So it really comes into conflict potentially when we have to have difficult conversations with people. Most difficult conversations involve identity conflicts. And so let's just think about this a minute. Think about when you've had to consider a really hard conversation with someone and you get a lot of anxiety about it. Can I just hear from a couple of people what creates the anxiety when you know you have to have a conversation that's going to be difficult, where your courage is being called upon? What makes it hard?
Probably saying the wrong thing, being seen a certain way.
Yeah. So if you say the wrong thing, Kathy, just pull that thread a little bit more. If I say the wrong thing, then what?
They'll be viewed that I'm not competent, that I'm not understanding.
That I'm not understanding, that I'm not competent. Sorry. So there's a very big piece of our identity for some of us that I am competent. I am competent, right? So if that's something that we hold, it's the positive view that we want others to have of us. To look incompetent in a conversation is a huge identity conflict for us. And so without even thinking about it, we make a choice then about how we might show up in that conversation, right? So Kathy, let's just take a little bit more. So if it's like, I don't want to look incompetent, therefore I will do what?
I will do whatever. Really whatever to make it seem like I'm not incompetent. And that may be I don't want to say lie, but I want to say I just want to make sure they understand exactly what I'm feeling.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's think about that for a minute. If we look at the invitation challenge, it's like, I want to show that I'm competent. I want you to know what I'm talking about. Where do you think that might fall on the matrix? Let me go up for a minute here. Where do you think you might show up on the matrix if where you're coming from in a difficult conversation is, I am competent and that's how I want to show up?
I may try more truth than grace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
It's like, let me just tell you. Let me just tell you what I'm going to tell you because I want you to know what I'm going to tell you.
right.
Right?
Exactly.
So beautiful. And it happens in an instant. And it's a moment where in any given situation, we then give that voice more power than is necessary. So even though I know several of you had written in chat, oh, I think my default voice is grace. Sometimes it is. In other situations, it's probably truth. It depends on what the trigger is. You know, we've talked about emotional intelligence and what the trigger is. Like if I would say probably if there's a situation where someone violates deeply one of your deeply held morals, at least for me, I'm not going to be graceful. I'm going to be really truthful. And I'm going to move in that place of, it feels like a statement of you're wrong and you need to do something. There's a lot of shoulds that sits in the fixed part of this, a lot of shoulds that sit there. Kathy, thank you so much for raising that up. I appreciate it. So what we want to give you a tool around is when you're going into, we're going to actually have you do this around feedback because it's around difficult conversations that our default can most likely show up and not serve us well, right? Because we get scared, because we get anxious. So we want to give you a tool, which we introduced last time, which is called the STAR model, as a way to help you begin to really lift up your default voice around something, understand it and use it. Then we're going to challenge you to use the other voice solely. So you can really practice that. And then we're going to challenge you to integrate them together. Okay. So let's just do a quick reminder here about grace, right? Grace side of the model. This is where we give people a lot of empathy, a lot of benefit of the doubt. We give them a lot of, there's a lot of decency and there's a lot of space in which we give them around what has happened, right? And we do that even when we feel like they don't deserve it. Critical skill. And if we stay too much in this space when we're trying to give critical feedback, let me just have you write in chat. If we stay too much in the grace piece of giving critical feedback in a hard conversation, what might be the implication of that? Just write it in chat. Implication of it, yeah, right, Lauren, right? You're not really honest. And Kathy was like, it's not that we really want to lie. We just don't necessarily give the whole truth. Joanna, right. The person walks away. They don't even know what you just told them. It's like, oh, that wasn't so bad. Oh, everything's fine. I don't need to change anything. Yeah. So I'll give you a quick example. I'm in my office here and my dog likes to be in the room with me. So I've said to my husband, listen, I can't have him in here. So can you manage him today? He's like, oh yeah, fine. Well, at the beginning of our call today, I hear the dog barking and scratching outside my door, right? So I was tempted to go out there and say, you said you were going to watch him, get him out of here, right? That was going to be my feedback to him. Which is not very graceful. It's a lot of truth, but it's not very graceful. So I love what you all are writing in here, right? Because this is really powerful stuff when you think about your leadership. As a leader, one of our most significant roles is to help people grow. And when we just use grace, learning doesn't happen. The negative behavior continues because people don't know what we're asking them to do differently. The other person thinks we're incompetent. We leave confused. It was kind of like, what? I don't get it, right? They look at us and go, you don't seem to be able to be very direct with me about what needs to happen. These are all really powerful things because often what happens is when we default too strongly to the one voice, and even though we're saying, oh, I want to be competent, so I'm going to show my real competence, people are like, wow, you're really incompetent in how you deal with people. The exact opposite occurs, right? The exact opposite of what we're hoping for occurs. So let's go to truth. Okay. So truth, the way we've described it, is being direct, speaking with candor, being open, being frank, being honest. Now, let's just go there for a minute, right? If we go into feedback conversations with this mindset, with this identity of I'm going to be truthful and honest. That's my goal, to be truthful and honest. What are the implications here? We don't bring in grace, we bring in truth and challenge. What is the implication that you have experienced in your own life about what happens when that gets applied? Truth and challenge. You can go ahead and put it in chat. You sound like a jerk, you're overbearing. People get hurt by it. The relationship is damaged. People feel bullied. People feel like they're not heard. People stop listening. People feel like you don't care. Todd, yep, people get really defensive during this. They close down, they don't listen, because what we're doing is we're triggering that amygdala, right? We're creating fear in them. We're creating a sense of you're not good enough. You're not doing what I want. You should be different, right? We're rough around the edges. Yeah, people close down. They don't listen. It's passive aggressive. People feel like, what's my role here? I don't even feel like I belong here because you're just telling me what to do, right? I'm at risk. I'm on eggshells. Okay. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you do some practice. So I want you to grab a piece of paper. Because I'm going to have you do 3 triangles here. So if you can just grab a piece of paper and a pen, we're going to have you do some practice here. Right. And the first practice we're going to have you do is around applying just grace, right? Just grace. So I want you to think about someone you want to provide feedback to with the intent of helping them grow. Okay. This can be a colleague. This can be a boss. This can be your child. This can be your spouse. This can be a friend. This can be a family member. Anybody that you're finding you have a pattern with potentially, and you're like, oh, man, this is going to kind of be a hard conversation. It could be sensitive, but I want to do it because I want to help them grow. Okay. And I'm going to ask you to think about, to really construct this triangle from the identity lens of, I am a loving, caring, supportive person. That's my identity in this. I am a loving, caring, supporting person. That's how I want to be seen. That's the positive image I want to have with this person. Okay. Now, before we have you do this, so just be thinking about that as we give you a chance to watch an example of this, right? I'm going to have Pete pull up a video that we're going to share where grace is in action pretty strongly. Well, some grace, a lot of avoid is in action as well, but grace only, enabling, remember, enabling is in action and avoiding is in action. And so let me just set the stage here. This is a clip from the show Friends. And Rachel, the character, has just spent hours making a trifle for a Thanksgiving dinner. And she doesn't cook. She's really proud of it. But what she doesn't realize is that she mixed up recipes and she put meat in the trifle, which meat is not in any trifle. So everyone in the group knows this and they're getting ready to try the trifle. So just watch the way in which what happens with her as they give her feedback. All right. So Pete, I'm going to turn it over to you.
It's trifle time. So now, Rach, this is a traditional English trifle, isn't it? It sure is. Wow. So then did you make it with beef or eggplant? Beef. I can't have any. You know I don't eat beef. Oh. All right, Monica, I want you to have the first taste. Really? Well, it's good. Really? It's so good that I feel really selfish about being the only one who's eating it. I think we should have everyone taste how good it is, especially Ross.
Yeah, this is so good that I'm going to go enjoy it on the balcony. So I can enjoy the view whilst I enjoy my dessert.
call my friend Mary and tell her how good this is for Monica's room.
I'll help you, Doc.
I'm gonna go into the bathroom so I can look at it in the mirror as I eat it. Okay, now what was that all about? Does it not taste good? Let me try it.
No. All gone. So good. Maybe Chandler has some left. It tastes like feet. I like it. Are you kidding? What's not to like? Custard, good. Jam, good. Meat, good.
So a bird just grabbed it and then tried to fly away with it and then just dropped it on the street?
Yes, but if it's any consolation, before the bird dropped it, he seemed to enjoy it.
Okay, so let me just share with us, what were some of the things, what strategies were her friends using? What strategies? Were they being graceful? Were they being graceful? What do you think they were doing what they were doing? Just say, why do you think they were doing what they were doing? Yeah, but they were lying, right? Like they would probably say they weren't lying, but it's like, that's right, Amy, they didn't want to hurt her feelings, right? It's like they avoided, oh, I'm just going to go out here. When we want to be seen as deeply caring and loving people, right? And we don't want to hurt someone's feelings, even though this is an exaggeration, we can show up in this way very easily when grace is what we're trying to apply. Okay. So what I want you to do is think about that feedback. Think about who you want to give some feedback to. And I want you to purely go to grace. You would be loving, caring, and supportive. And I want you to construct your feedback, because Scott had said, when we go into difficult conversations, it's really important that we do some preparation, right? It really helps us calm down, get quiet, be clear. So what I want you to do is I want you to start on the bottom left-hand side of the triangle. Right? Because what we want to do is, like in this situation with Rachel, it would be, Rachel, when you made that trifle for us for Thanksgiving, you're trying to get people into the context of what you're going to give them feedback around, right? Then you want to talk about the action or the behavior. So what is it that you're noticing them doing, right? You made this really wonderful trifle for us, and oh, it was just so great. And the result is, oh, and we can't wait to try it, and we can't wait for you to make it again, right? Now, we're not telling her the truth, but we're trying to validate that she's tried, okay? So it's a very easy process: situation, the action and behavior, and what the result is. So I want you to just take a minute to construct your triangle around that person that you would give feedback around, okay? Because this is going to start to show you where do you have natural tendencies, where is it real easy for you to do this, and where does it get a little harder? Because this is a feedback tool you can use as a way to begin a hard conversation, right? So I'm going to ask you to construct one, and then I'm going to just ask a person to share theirs. And I'm very good at calling on people. Get that triangle written. Okay, I'm going to stop this a minute here. And I would love a volunteer, just a way to coach you through the triangle. Great, Amy, if you're on, are you on?
I am.
Okay, great. Okay, so Amy, assume that I'm the person you're giving feedback to, okay? So go ahead and you can use this model in whatever way you want. You can start with a situation, then go to action, then go to result, but you can play around with it. So start wherever you'd like with me and give me the feedback.
Oh, Anne, I needed your coaching before I did this. Oh my God, that's why I raised my hand. Okay, so coming from pure grace, or
Pure
like just my honest, like, here's what I really want to say.
No, you can do that. Maybe you put in the next one, which will be truth. Let's come from pure grace. Pure grace. Like, what might be your natural default for how you would give me this feedback? What would you say?
Do you want the situation, or do you want me
Yep.
to? Okay.
Yep. Tell me.
So the
Well,
situation is,
yeah.
I have a friend who is, I see his goodness, I see his wisdom, but and I want a connection between him and my friends and him and my family, and yet he talks a lot about himself. He doesn't listen to others before he shares about himself. And like for me, in our one-on-one dialogue, it's good, but when I bring him out to others, I'm like, oh, like zip, 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 don't say anything. Like ask them about them. Like listen, seek to understand. So I think I'd say, I love you and I see you and I love what you have to say. And there is an appropriate time to share about your own story or infuse what you want to say. It's about timing and just it's a dance and it's a rhythm.
And Amy, as you think about the conversation, what makes it hard for you?
I don't want to trigger his wounds. If I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy. I don't want to trigger his wounds.
Yeah, because you're a loving, caring person, right? And in some ways that means we protect people from hard things. They've had hard things in their life, and I want to protect you from hard things, right? And so it may be very soft in the way that we would share with him, when you do that, this happens, right? So like when he does that, what happens, Amy? What's the result? When you see him insert in that way, what is the result?
I see people tuning out. I see people kind of just like repulsed and
yeah.
judgy.
And Amy, what might it say about you to your friends and family that you see him so differently than them?
What it might, well, they, from a judgmental side, they might be like, what is she doing? She's clueless. Why does she hang out with this person?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why do you like him so much? I mean, right we have to recognize identity. It shows up in all ways here, right? There's a reason why you're driven to help him belong in your deepest tribe of people. Right? Because you want to be seen as someone who's a good judge of character. You want to be seen as someone who is confident in choosing relationships. So there's also that piece that comes in that we have to recognize in our own identity about what's coming up here, right? And so, Amy, you could go full on truth with him, right? Full on truth. Could be the other side of this. And so we're going to get to that one in a minute. Right?
You don't want to hear it.
Yeah, right? And why? Why wouldn't we want to hear it?
Because it's harsh.
It's harsh. And do you see yourself from an identity perspective as a harsh person? No.
Well, in circumstances, yes. But...
Okay, right. Like when it serves some outcome.
Yeah.
Right. There's a time for truth. There's a time sometimes when full truth is the right approach. There are times where full grace is the right approach. We're not saying you have to do one, the other. We just want you to be aware in the given situation that you're at and the result that you want, which one is best applicable. Is it really full grace? Is it really full truth? Is it the combination of the two? Right? And each of us have to discern that based on the relationship that we have. So please be aware, we're not saying one is right or wrong, or there are times for all of these. However, we want you to recognize that if you go more towards grace more often than not, that your pattern is enablement. Right? If it becomes the pattern, that's when we get into the problem. Right now, what I want you to do, I'm going to ask you to take that exact same situation, and I'm going to have you apply just truth and candor. But before we do it, we want to give you an example of what it might look like in action. So Pete, I'm going to have you queue up the next video. This is what it might look like, for example, if you're giving your spouse some feedback or not.
I did the choreography myself. Hey honey, have you gained some weight in your rear end? The dress you wear reminds me of my old girlfriend. And where'd you get those shoes? I think they're pretty lame. Would you stop talking, cause I'm trying to watch the game? If you're a man who wants to live a long and happy life, these are the things you don't say to your wife. I planned a hunting trip next week on your birthday. I didn't ask you, but I knew it'd be okay. I'll go make some dinner while I watch this fishing show. I taped it over our old wedding video. If you're a man who done that, a long and happy life, lives on the solo.
All right, Pete, thank you. Right, pretty blunt, pretty forthcoming. So what I want, again, take that same situation, exact same situation, and if you were going to come at it from the identity of, I want to be truthful, I want to be honest, I want to be frank, I want to be candid, reconstruct your triangle. How would it change what you call out and what you would say? Right? How would it change how you would show up?
It's not my tendency, my natural. So I'm noticing you're losing people quick. People aren't listening to you. You're not capturing an audience, and they're not hearing you. What you have to say is really amazing. And at the same time, no one's listening because you didn't till the soil. You didn't feel the room. You didn't ask them about them. So you don't have the rapport yet.
And so, Amy, we're going to pause there just a minute. Okay. We're going to pause there just a minute. And I just want everybody else to go ahead and recreate their triangle if you haven't done that yet. Thank you, Amy, for sharing that. We're going to come back to it. And Amy, I'm going to ask you, and then Jamie Kenny, I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, so I'm priming you up. So Amy, how did it feel to shift your approach?
Harsh.
Yeah. And so how did it feel inside of you?
The feeling aggressive. I felt aggressive.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And would you say that one of the positive traits you want to be known for yourself is that you're aggressive?
Sometimes, but not yet. But yeah, not in conversation. Absolutely.
Not in this circumstance,
yeah.
Right? Not in this circumstance. So there's an identity question for Amy here right now, which is like, how do I do this in a way that is assertive and loving? Right? Which is going to be the third triangle. Jamie, let me just ask you about your experience of writing your first triangle and your second triangle. What did you notice?
So one of the things that I know about me is early in my career, I was a lot more on the grace side. And I realized that that's not always where I need to be. So I just had this situation come up with a client last year, and I was helping with their building their department, trying to understand how everyone's role fit in. And this conversation between Grace and Truth really played a role, because I had a situation with an employee who, she was good at her job. She had been put into a manager situation, but she always felt she was right. She should have never been promoted into a manager situation. And I was trying to work with her to help her understand that her way was and we were very different. She was very much a my way or the highway. I was a data driven, what are we learning from this? And so when I look at these two together, this conversation we had several times, and it went early on, you try to, I really feel the whole clear as kind is very important. And so I started off a little softer, a little more graceful with it. And then we've had to have the conversation many times. So I saw it from the grace side, and then I saw it more from the truth side. And, it's so frustrating because I've been in this business a long time, right? And I don't want to feel like I'm the old bitter hag that's saying, look, this is the way it needs to be. But at the same time, you see positive things in someone and you want to try to help them. You want them to open up, to listen to the truth conversation. And sometimes it's just very difficult because you try to do that from a grace standpoint, and it's not getting you anywhere, even though you're trying to pepper it with the truth. So we got to a point where it became a very much more of a truth situation, and saying to someone, this is what you did wrong. This was the reaction from your employees. This is the feedback we're getting. And so it turns you into, they weren't on board with you when you were graceful. They're certainly not going to be on board with you when you're truthful. And so that was a lesson for me, because it was very difficult. Because I'm not necessarily, the harsh, awful person. And sometimes when you're all truth, that's where you end up being. And so, that situation was very hard.
Yeah, Jamie, I can hear, wow, this attempt to come at it really gracefully, and that's your natural style, and then to not make progress there, and then to flip, to the, all right, I'm going to flip right to the truth. Right. And so it's this really hard balance of knowing who we can get really focused on. What is the result that I need? What is the result that I need, right? The question I'm going to have you ask yourself, because we're like 3 minutes away, and I know this took longer, team, than what we anticipated. The question I would ask is, when you look at the blend of truth and grace, which would be the third triangle, I would have you construct around this. I would have you look at, who do I want to be in this conversation? So Jamie, you're like, what I don't want to be is the bitter hag. What I don't want to be is harsh and awful. What I don't want to be is unkind. What do we want to be?
Right.
What do I want to be? So Amy, like, what do I want to be? Right. So Jamie, you could reconstruct this to go, what I do want to be is the one showing up who has a lot of great experience that I'd like to offer to her.
Right.
How I do want to show up is the person who really cares about her success, because I want this organization to succeed, and she's a pivotal part of that. If we can change the way we want to show up and the way we position the other person in it, it can free us up around how we actually talk with folks. But let's start there, not with the result. I want them to change this. I want her to do this. How do I want to show up in it? And play with that a little bit over the next month to see how it opens up the possibility of how you use those two. Okay.
That's great. Yeah.
So I want to thank Jamie and Amy. Thank you so much for your transparency and your courage for those situations. I think Wendy Roop, I'm so sorry, my love. I'm giving you only 2 minutes to finish this out.
It's all right, right? The year of flexibility. First of all, from me to all of you, Happy New Year. Second of all, thanks team. Awesome job in all that you shared. I'm just gonna leave you with this. Here's some homework, okay? So based on based on what we talked about regarding our choices, based on what we talked about versus grace versus truth, and how we want to live up, in, and out. 2 questions for you to ponder before we get together next time. One, what do you want to learn or experience in 2021? And number 2, what do you want to give back to the world? And I just love that question too, based on everything that we just talked about, because it comes back to choice, right? We get to choose on how we have these conversations. We get to choose in how we show up. And so based on that, how do we want to give back to the world? What do we want to give back to the world? And so take some time to think about that and reflect, if you will, and we'll come back to that. And then I just want to leave you with this. I saw this quote, this little blurb when I was looking for some things in preparation for this, and I just love it. So bear with me as I read this to you for a second. This 2021, pursue peace. Pursue peace over your deepest understandings, for within it there is freedom over all things mistaken, over broken conversations, over all the things you thought you would hold a little stronger and grow a little longer than they did. Let it be peace that reels you in, reminding you it is okay to trust that the story is still being written, even without knowing how it will end. So keep on keeping on, everybody. And it was, thank you for sharing. Thank you for being open and vulnerable. Great job, team. And we will see you in February. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Great week.
Bye.